Hello, hello. Thank you for joining me. This is my final day, sharing the passages that are most prominent to me and my synthesis of the focus topics from Book 31 in my Book a Week series, Alan Watts' Beyond Theology. There are so many contemplative pathways that can lead to an expansion of consciousness and what we may call awakening. The most prominent pathway for me has been marked by a movement from trauma to forgiveness, and parallel to that, a movement from suffering or resistance to pain to surrender to what the human condition is, or perhaps synonymous to that, a forgiveness of myself. The beginning of this contemplative pathway is marked by the question, how could an individual who has done something that I would characterize as wrong have come to do what they did? What combination of genetic mapping and collection of events and circumstances in their life experience could have possibly led to their having chosen to do what they did? Where I inevitably am delivered through this contemplation is the following destination or statement. If I were that person, considering their unique combination of genetic mapping and collection of life experience, I would be that person and do as that person has done. And likewise, if that person were me, they would be me and do as I do. This inevitably frees me to forgiveness of all. This inevitably frees me to sink into or drop myself back into the trust that when I don't understand, and when I am clenched by or constricted in the sensations that come along with a lack of understanding, anger, rage, insistence to make a change, suffering, there is understanding to be had somewhere, even if I have not accomplished it yet. I will loop this into my first reading of the day. The real I, both in and beyond the spotlit circle, both in consciousness and beyond consciousness, is nothing less than all that there is. Obviously, I exist only in relation to everything else, but I did not come into that relation from somewhere outside in such a way that everything else would be foreign to or other than myself. I did not alight in this universe like a bird arriving upon a branch from some alien limbo. I grew upon that branch like a leaf, for I am something which everything is doing. I am the whole process waving a flag named me and calling out, yoo-hoo! Without further ado, I'll move on toward today's readings. Enjoy. What I thought was myself was a phantom. My ego was never an effective agent. My supposed controlling of the world and of myself was a big act, like a child sitting beside the driver of a car, getting the feeling of guiding it himself with a toy steering wheel. But then, who or what am I? If I can neither do nor not do, still at least I know. I'm aware. Am I simply some sort of passive mirror which merely reflects experience? Who is it that knows? Look as I may, I find no knower, only knowing. No doer, only doing. Yet all this is somehow encompassed in that odd sensation of centrality which I call I. And I know that you feel just as central and just as much I as I myself, I know too that when in sleep or in death, the centrality which I presume to call mine vanishes. There remain myriads of other centralities, all of whom are as much I as I am. Page 158. There are sudden slips of consciousness into a wavelength or dimension of this everyday world which impress those who see them as being more real than the normal vision. These slips are relatively common and must have been so throughout human history, and it seems to me unquestionable that they are the actual basis for doctrines of paradise and of an ultimate transfiguration of the world. 160. It is possible, therefore, to envision a church, a Christianity, in which Godmanhood is fully realized, in which the incarnation has been assimilated, and which, in this everyday world, is already living beyond the parousia in the glory of heaven. This will not be a preaching church, not a finger-wagging, Bible-banging, breast-thumping, floor-licking church. It will be the church of all fools, laughing like Dante's angels, laughing because it has just seen through the enormous trick that the Lord has played on himself in pretending to be us, scaring the living daylight out of himself by acting the lonely ego tormented by sin, with death and hell at last, laughing itself to tears because the whole world has been completely misunderstood, for it has been looked at with a spotlight called consciousness, so narrow in scope that it was all but impossible to see how things are actually related. But only in that relationship do things have their meaning and their beauty, as well as their existence. Page 178. I've been trying to show that the Christian way, the challenge of Christ, is a double bind, in that it commands the deliberate enactment of spontaneous behavior, such as love and humility. When this commandment is presented to people who believe that they are separate and independent egos, the rigorous attempt to obey it will result in a paralysis, which reveals the ego to be a fiction, and leads on to a new sense of identity. Page 204. I've always felt that the real root of the Christian concern that God should be other lies in a confusion about what is oneself. The more we are accustomed to restrict the self to the faculty and the contents of conscious attention, the more it must seem that there are whole areas in me that are beyond me, because the conscious ego does not control, let alone understand or produce, all those psychophysical processes upon which it depends. It is thus that they seem other and the workmanship of another, and, as the psalmist sang, it will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Yet, if the definition of the self can include areas outside normal consciousness and its control, it would not be necessary to jump to the conclusion that the fearful and wonderful processes of my inmost being are the work of someone else. Letting go comes only through desperation, when you know that it is beyond you, beyond your powers of action, as beyond your powers of relaxation. When you give up every last trick and device for getting it, including this giving up, as something that one might do, say at 10 o'clock tonight, that you cannot by any means do it. That is it. That is the mighty self-abandonment which gives birth to the stars.